like a wave to the shore. You came into my world.
Now I've seen everything. Black.
Seoul has some really damn good human design. So I feel like in that capacity, this movie is objectively a landmark not only for Pixar but for 3D animation in general. Cartoonishly stylized human beings are something that Pixar has slowly but surely been perfecting over the years. Look back at Toy Story 1 where they just duplicated models of Andy for his birthday party and didn't even bother showing his mom's face. And then you move ahead a little bit to something like The Incredibles, which is highly stylized, or Ratatouille, which are more in the Cal-artsy kind of art style of Brad Bird, which are a lot more simple. And now we're at something that's much more extreme as a caricature, especially in terms of shapes and designs. You could really see these as a well-constructed 2D drawing as well as a really good 3D render. That's what we got with the people in Seoul. One of the three writer-directors, Peter Docter, had made a statement about a certain aspect of designing the people in this movie. Aware of the racist history behind black designs in animation, his team put a focus on making sure everything looked distinctly black, like of their race, but without making things look like a racially charged mockery. We're putting a lot of emphasis on like the head shapes, like the cheekbones and the forehead sizes, and a lot with the hair here, trying to avoid the basic trappings of huge nose, huge lips. A lot of the characters do have really big noses, but this kind of spreads throughout every race in this movie. Everybody in this movie has a big nose if they're a human. It comes off less like a caricature and more so just that the artist designing them thinks that big noses are funny. And although this movie looks very nice visually, unfortunately from a structural point of view, Seoul feels like three different movies to me. One of them being a body swap story, which could be taken as a Jiminy Cricket and Pinocchio dynamic as well. A smart but downtrodden girl in the body of a black man receives sage advice on how to love life from a streetwise old cat who sounds like an old black guy. While at the same time, the cat, living life with tunnel vision on certain objectives and always possessing something of an ego, realizes something about himself and how to be humble. The other movie being something akin to Inside Out, a hyper-marketable story about personality blobs and given a gender-neutral perspective to appeal to the gender identity Twitter crowd, but giving the older ones charming British accents so that Midwestern soccer moms might not notice and get too upset over this aspect. Then there's the third movie, which is basically like a season 1 or 2 Simpsons plot. A down-on-his-luck teacher faces a life-threatening injury on what would have been his greatest day and overcomes this obstacle, lives his dream only to realize that what he's needed was there for him all along. These three combined movies make our one complete movie feel a bit scatterbrained, random, and disjointed when moving forward in the story, but do all tie together very well at the end. The climax working as a very satisfying, albeit quick, merging of these three separate films. And although this climax manages to tie everything together pretty well, I still wish we could have trimmed the fat on at least one of these marketable adventures. Like, we're making a movie about humans, and humans have 2 legs. We don't need a third leg here, let's cut off this third leg. For that reason, I don't love Seoul. I like it, and it's visually beautiful. I didn't even talk about how nice New York looks in this movie, or even like when we're in the blob zones, their like animations and movements are all very snappy and cartoonish and really cool looking. But then from a story perspective, like from a thematic perspective, it does something that I really love. For a little context about me and my general taste, I recently watched Fargo for the first time ever. Also The Interview, but let's not talk about that one. See, Fargo is incredible and very easily one of my top 10 movies as of now. A top 10 that's changed a bit since my End of Ava video. If you want to peep what the new top 10 is, it's up here now. Fargo's the first movie that made me realize I legitimately love the Coen brothers' filmmaking style. Because I enjoyed The Big Lebowski, and I really admire the filmmaking, like visually, of No Country for Old Men. But Fargo, with its realistic dialogue and acting, amazing visual direction, and the general pace and realism of the movie, with its dry humor, really struck a chord with me. More so than the other 2 movies I had seen by these directors. But Fargo could be like its own video essay, and unfortunately that's not nearly as marketable as Seoul is, so I'm here talking about Seoul. All you really need to know going forward is that Fargo as a whole really struck a chord with me. It sparked something in me that made me want to get my ass in gear and work more on personal projects. Soul feels very much like a product of its time, and being a movie that started production in 2016, some of the pop culture jokes already dated the movie, like dropping a YOLO in there being one of the big things that comes to mind, which I'm pretty sure was even dated in 2016, among other things that just come off as being very clear pandering on an executive level done to make this movie as all audience friendly as possible. Movies like this make me kind of feel like I'm being talked down to, and inevitably disconnect me from the goings-on, because when something like this happens in a movie, I start picturing a boardroom meeting, where a diverse group of suits and skirts, and sometimes both, are trying to mark down a checklist of every single possible thing that could draw people into the movie or make people tweet about it. I already mentioned black leads in an animated film, and let's be real, that shouldn't be like a checkmark. That should just be something that we have more of. That should be more of a natural thing that happens in animated movies. But then there's plenty of others that are basically just checkmarks from an executive level, sometimes unfortunately, like gender identity, marketable blobs, marketable cats, the British, dated Zoomer slang, and let's not forget a little
George Orwell.
There's also a love interest who doesn't have much bearing on the main story and mostly exists to enforce our character's personality a bit more and show us his perspective, and also to tell us that he's not gay. There's also quippy characters and some kind of forced conflict and tension near the middle end of the movie that exists on top of the existing conflict and gets resolved in like a second. And let's not forget, every character needs to be quirky and likable. Let's make them dynamic and a little bit mean at the worst, but not to the extent that it comes off as generally unlikable and risk their sellability as a plushie. Disney and post-2010 Pixar have ironically lost a lot of their soul to the corporate think tank of marketing. Like, if you fucking bigwigs want this stuff in your movie, why not just make a whole movie about it and not just make it a checkmark on a list that needs to be filled? Like, just make a whole movie about gender identity, you cowards. But that's probably not gonna happen, at least not for a little while, because unfortunately all they really want is tweets. Because they want little things to slip in there so people tweet about it and more people go to see the movie. They want people to discuss it, to bring in viewers, and they want reviewers to discuss the big new Disney movie so the reviewer can go viral. And then with the review of the Disney movie comes more people going to the Disney movie via the reviewer. It's a codependent corporate cycle, and it's working. I'm doing it right now. And ironically, having so broad of a checklist to like tick off for everything they needed in the movie, they actually shot themselves in the foot. Because after the initial trailer where they showed the general idea of black guy becomes little blob, that had a very negative reaction. Black audiences felt genuinely cucked out of having yet another animated film with a black lead, repeating the pattern of them needing to be turned into some kind of squishy blue blob or like an animal, like literally a fucking frog, for the audience to relate to them. Which ironically, this movie went ahead and did both of, and also gave the black guy a white lady's voice. Some will say they only love the parts that take place in New York for the sake of looking cool to their friends, but I'm gonna be an outlier and say that even that beginning section and a lot of the middle were just kinda so-so to me. But I won't lie, there is tons of potential ingrained within the slice of life setting. I think a lot of people, myself included, were actually hoping for the struggling musician story much in the same vein as Fantasia 2000's Rhapsody in Blue. But what they got instead was a movie that wanted to be Inside Out, and for some reason is also kinda like Spies in Disguise. Honestly, what I was hoping for after seeing the best bits of this movie was something more of a slice of life fare, that season 1 Simpsons plot I had mentioned before. This gets into me rewriting the whole thing from the ground up, specifically the main premise, but still keeping the film's primary message, which result in something akin to a college thesis or a European film. And rewriting is not my objective here. My objective is to critique what we have, not what we could have had. I'm gonna leave the rewrites to the Star Wars prequel detractors. But speaking of the movie's message, I mentioned before that I loved Fargo, and that it really inspired me, and lit this creative flame within me. But what if I told you that despite how critical I am being of Soul, I still really like it, and it managed to have that same effect as Fargo? Most of that is due to the fact that despite its modern corporate trappings, it breaks the mold in a very powerful and really effective way. And it wasn't just at the tail end of it. I mentioned that I didn't really love the very beginning of the movie, but do you know where exactly I realized that I loved what this movie was trying to say? It wasn't in any of the New York parts. It was in the Great Before. The marketable, plushable, inside-out-esque story thread that a lot of people definitely wish wasn't there, myself included, because I did not like Inside Out, lol. No, let's break down the scene, though, and get across why the movie actually managed to spark something within me. So after Joe dies and narrowly escapes an eternity in the Great Beyond, he stumbles upon the Great Before, and is confused by one of the gender-neutral Jerrys for a child psychologist due to a false name tag labeling. So he's assigned to mentor a cynical and nihilistic blob named 22.
22 doesn't care about anything. He's a nihilist.
I keep bringing it back. I keep bringing the Coen brothers back. See, he's brought in and 22 expects the same old teaching routine, but Joe pulls a little switcheroo on her and reveals his true life.
It's my life.
It's not prestigious at all like the psychologist before him. It's dumpy, imperfect, but filled with an intense passion for what he's doing and what he loves, even if there are loves that he's lost and are long gone, like his cheap cologne, which is associated with a former love interest and a failed one at that, but he still holds it very dear to himself. They go right back to quippy Tina Fey 22 blob right after this to appeal to the kiddies, but oh god, the internal museum with Joe? I actually felt something, like I really genuinely felt an emotion I don't get to feel terribly often, but it's a sensation that I love to feel, and it made me realize that the movie Soul does in fact have a soul that's just begging to break out from our marketable hodgepodge, just holding back its potential. Just like the lead character Joe feels like the school system and his mom and even death itself are holding back his own potential. The rest of the movie progresses as told, fun yet formulaic, and occasionally uninspired. Takes a few risks, but never does anything to risk alienating its general audience. Always treads the line. Though it is still a really fun journey, and it's a really fun movie following our characters through New York, allowing for Joe to literally distance himself from himself, and actually learn by watching and listening to someone else for once, instead of always forcing himself to get a word in and thinking only of himself. This doesn't all immediately sink in, however, as once 22 gets his final badge and is deemed a complete soul. Oh, hey, look, the badges are kind of shaped like snowflakes. Get it? Because they're like special snowflakes. He yells at her and boasts his own accomplishments, showing a conceited and narcissistic side of himself that previously could only be kinda seen through being ambitious and very goal-oriented, with subtle hints of how annoying those character traits can be. He just assumes that 22 is inspired by music and that everybody wants to hear about him, when really we have no idea which particular event lit her spark. She was inspired by him and the experiences he took her on, but Joe, in his usual self-aggrandizing way, assumes his spark and his body caused her spark.
Because I have piano. It's what I was born to do. That's my spark.
A spark isn't a soul's purpose.
But was music really even Joe's purpose? Or was it just a push in the right direction? When he tries to jump down to Earth before, it's heavily implied that he's incomplete. So maybe he hadn't found his purpose yet.
I wouldn't call myself stuck, but I never planned on cutting heads for a living.
Wait, but you were born to be a barber, weren't you?
I wanted to be a veterinarian.
We can actually infer 22's spark might have come from a maple seed, in tangent to the reflection upon this beautiful day that came before the discovery of it. 22's spark wasn't Joe's life. It was just the joy of life itself. It was the simple pleasures of Earth, and the fact that even though it can be scary, it can be emotionally taxing, and it can be exhausting, it can also be legitimately delicious. It can be exciting. It can be just intriguing to take in the world around you, as the world you exist within, as scary and as bad as it can be, is still beautiful. The seed to 22 represents that earth, as it's a seed to a tree, whilst duly pertaining to herself. She is the seed, and she needs to be planted and given the chance to grow. She's been doing that all day, in fact. She attempts to hide any pain that she has using smarm and using a shell of condescending cynicism dashed with nihilism, you know? But when we look inside of her, like quite literally look inside of her when she decides to vore Joe, we see how much all of that condescending speaking really does start to get to her, even if it's all internalized. How no one believes in her and thinks she's horrible. And the catalyst to all those negative thoughts was the one person who she really thought once believed in her, and the one person who attempted to teach her, demeaned her for the sake of his own pride. Joe is chasing a specific happiness, one that gives him the idea of life completion and life satisfaction. But as we're explicitly told near the start of the movie, when he attempts to dive down into the portal to Earth, he's incomplete.
Well, that's too bad. You're stuck as a barber and now you're unhappy.
Whoa, slow your roll there, Joe. I'm happy as a clam, my man.
We could assume earlier that this is because he hasn't performed the show of his lifetime and hasn't lived his dream yet, but maybe it's something more than that. Maybe he hasn't actually found his purpose yet. We may think his happiness could be the same as his dad's, chasing his dreams of being a jazz musician, living doing the things he loves the most, the thing that inspires him. But little breadcrumbs are constantly dropped throughout the movie, with his repeating role as a teacher to 22, to the school, to people who just live in his life. And we're constantly told and shown just how effective he is at his teaching job, how good he is at inspiring people. The reason Joe hasn't found his purpose is that all this time, he's actually been a lighter, lighting the sparks within others and helping them grow.
That's the magic of the chair. That's why I love this job. I get to meet interesting folks like you, make them happy, and make them handsome.
And that's where we can once again look at the maple seed for a third meaning, and how the seed pertains to Joe, with a sequence that's completely dialogueless, harkening back to early Pixar works, letting us take in every single thing through visuals and action, just letting the scene tell us everything we need to know. This is that core soul to soul. Joe remembers the entire day with objects that harken back to the goings-on of the day. So another thing I noticed that I didn't actually pick up on until I started editing the video and reviewing my footage, there's a shot where Joe straight up takes the piano music, moves it aside, and in its place straight up just scatters items from throughout the day in front of him, thus showing us that the actual soul to himself and to his music doesn't come from the music that was written out before him. It comes from the experiences we've had and the things that we've done, alone or with others. With the catalyst being the seed, the maple seed that represents 22, and to Joe, represents that discovery of his true calling as a lighter. He is to plant these seeds and help them grow. He is to teach. After having this revelation and having spent almost 40 years assuming what he wants, he's willing to give up his entire life for this younger soul, this soul with future potential. His previous dream ended up being mundane. It lacked the true excitement he's always yearned for, the same excitement that he had gotten while teaching and working with 22. So he's willing to sacrifice his old dream and even his own existence for the sake of empowering another's and finding that skill, that teaching skill, equally as satisfying. He's fully taken on his true calling and passion to enlighten others and to inspire them, even at the cost of his own dream and his very existence. That's fucking powerful. We don't always find our sparks right out the gate, as half of this movie would seem to imply. Sometimes we're like Joe, and almost have to fumble around in the dark for years and years, just loving life until the right thing finally manages to hit us. People kind of speculate on what'll happen to 22 when she gets to Earth, and considering she associates a lot with hippies, is quite good at talking to people and socializing with people, and her revelation is symbolized with the seed, I think it's very likely that she'll become some kind of environmentalist or natural preservationist, a Earth lover and people lover who looks to preserve Earth and preserve life upon Earth. There is an alternative message within the movie that can be gleaned, and I think it is the most common one that people have gleaned, but I don't agree with it. This message being, don't let your life and your personal value be defined by your dreams and your job. That's not a bad message on paper, but the way it's presented, complementary to the movie, and how people have come to that conclusion is very upsetting when given the contextualization of the film. To see everything that happened and everything that Joe had worked for, and to take away that you're not to have aspirations within your career or that you're never to work to aim higher, seems very stupid, to be completely blunt. Joe, at the climax of the movie, finds not only purpose but balance. He finds satisfaction in his ability to work as a teacher and how valuable of a skill that teaching skill is, as well as a balance between his dream and his passion for jazz with his teaching skill, whilst learning the importance to keep those he cares about close to him, like his mom, and in a way like 22. A significant development from plotting to straight up abort an unborn soul so he can selfishly live his own dream at the beginning. By the end, Joe doesn't learn that his job doesn't define him. What he's learned is that he's actually had a great life all along. He has people who love him and who care about him. He's good at what he does no matter what others will say. And he loves his location, he loves where he is, he loves Astoria, New York City. He's also learned to just shut up and listen to people, listen to other people, listen to the world around him, instead of always just trying to force his obsession onto everybody. The Snowflake's badge for the soul shows a couple of prongs, one of which is the spark. His spark is probably music, it's probably specifically jazz music. So of course, by the very visual nature, what he's passionate about is going to in some way define him. It's part of the prong, and it's common sense for you to work hard to pursue your dreams and to pursue a happy place that satisfies you within this dream. Just so long as this dream doesn't become toxic or annoying to those around you.
So, what do you think you'll do? How are you going to spend your life?
I'm not sure. But I do know. I'm gonna live every minute of it.
I watched the movie with my girlfriend, and we both gleaned similar but different messages from the movie. Hers was more like 22's, that life is beautiful and you can find happiness in the simple pleasures of the world around you. Mine was like Joe Gardner's, that sometimes life can be something beyond your dream, and you should work hard to find a state of mind that makes you content, and maybe consider the fact that sometimes what's most important to you was always present in your life. You just had to wake up and notice it. In the nicest way possible, her and I are very much similar to the two leads of 22 and Joe Gardner. Thus, our takeaways were actually complementary to the characters we act the most like. I've spent most of my life dreaming, obsessing, and annoying everyone around me with what I'm passionate about. I make video essays about what I'm passionate about, filmmaking and animation. I worked as an animator for about 6 years and 4 years where it was full-time, and I was fortunate enough, and I dare say lucky enough, to make a livable wage off of my work as an artist for a good chunk of time, to the point where it was actually viable for me to move to what might be my favorite American city, Boston, along with my South Carolina transplant roommate, i.e. Jomaflo. I lived a lot of my life like 22 when she was suddenly popped into Joe Gardner's body, in a way. Given this sudden burst of new robust experiences, food, cultures, styles, and all the activities near inherent with big city life, as opposed to my old suburb life where restaurants and a mall were close but everything else was like 20 to 30 minutes away. Ironically, when I began my life in Boston, I was 22 years old, and I didn't exactly start in the best possible situation. I lived in a basement, like a literal fucking basement, for my entire first year there, with shitty upstairs neighbors who oh so loved to just stomp everywhere. We didn't actually have a central heating system, or more specifically, we didn't have an adjustable thermostat. We had a big pipe that ran through our ceiling that just so happened to also be our heat source. The problem was, it got really hot. So we always had to crack windows open to let the heat out, even on the coldest possible days. But to be honest, the wretchedness of my actual living situation didn't really bother me, because I had this great power to stand up, walk on my 2 feet, and leave. I could leave my dank domain and walk around and sightsee within this beautiful city, see cool things like concerts or retro theaters or record shops, any kind of store that I wanted, art galleries, thrift shop, all these fun group activities with people who are equally passionate about the same things I am, eat delicious foods, and fantasize about having a better future home by just looking at how much nicer a lot of these other apartments were. And all of this sudden burst of excitement and this new perspective on life was happening while doing a job as an artist that was slowly losing more and more of its luster, at least in the capacity in which I was performing it. This section of the video is at its core a eulogy. A eulogy not for a wasted life, but for wasted time. With animation jobs waning more and more in frequency, so too did my passion, my prior spark, for being content with my gig work. I wasn't happy with my job, at least not in the same capacity that I was performing it in. So I left. I moved on. I decided to aim for something that would help me work towards my actual goals in life while still giving me time to spend with my friends and the ones I love around me. I found balance. I haven't given up on my dreams, God forbid, and I've never let my dreams ever fully define every aspect of my life. But my consistent aspiration and desire to create has been and always will be present within my heart, and it will always be there within me. Everything I do is in service of creating my ideal life. It's in service of finding my happy place and what makes me happy. It's why I moved, it's why I'm now changing my job, and it's why I'm still making video essays because of a pure passion for teaching and speaking about what I love. It's honestly why I ever even bothered trying dating in the first place, despite my ambivert nature, because I knew just by being myself and sticking with it and being tenacious, I'd finally find someone who loved me just as much as I loved them. And it's why I still aim to create works, to create art of my own choosing, aiming for something even greater than just the middling satisfaction of a paycheck from a gig. Life is more than just work. But that doesn't mean that you can't show passion, nor strive to show passion for what you do, nor seek satisfaction within your working life. So if you're gonna come here, look me in the eye, and leave a shitty comment saying that a good takeaway is that my job isn't important and that my dreams aren't either, then you can go fuck yourself. The message is to find your happiness. It's about working towards creating a balance between personable relationships, your personal passion, and a will to live and love life to its fullest extent. But yeah, I guess Seoul was pretty okay. Happy New Year.